Who goes first?
It's me. Hey, everybody. Matt Gunn here, FlyingGiants.com. This is our FAA sort of live podcast that we're doing here. And I've got Bill Malvey, who is an FG regular. Flying Giants goes by the name of Judge. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing good today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. I just want to do a little bit of discussion. I want to pick your brain because you're very active in some of the FAA issues and the threads that are on Flying Giants, and no better person to talk about it with than somebody who seems to know a little bit about it. And I know there's a lot going on, and everybody is sort of, I wouldn't say crying wolf, but there's a lot of people that are scared right now about the hobby. There's a lot of different opinions floating around, and I just want to get your opinion. Let's just talk a little bit about the FAA and the Reauthorization Act of 2016, if you could.
Well, this basically all started in 2012 when there was the last FAA Reauthorization Act, and Congress has to reauthorize the FAA every 4 years. And what they do is as part of that, they tend to write a large bill that's got all kinds of other things that they want the FAA to do. Like, for instance, this year, one of the things that the House tried to do was they wanted to privatize the air traffic control functions and take that away from the FAA. That got stripped out. But so these bills are an opportunity for the Congress to instruct FAA on things that they do. In 2012, the AMA was successful in working with Congress to get what's lovingly been called Section 336, which looked like it gave us, a safe harbor. It carved out kind of some exemptions and said, told the FAA that as long as we did what we were doing under the auspices of a community-based organization like the AMA, that we'd be, quote, safe.
Right.
Of course, the FAA put their own special twist on that in June of 2014 and came out with their interpretation, which they're free to do, and the AMA took exception to that and filed suit. So here we are now in 2016. It's time for the reauthorization to come up. What that basically means is that Section 336 essentially goes away because it's part of the old authorization. So that's why it has to be reauthorized. And both houses, the Senate and the House, both come up with their own versions of the the FAA reauthorization bill. The House has already done theirs, and that was called I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's AIRR 2016.
Seen that. Yep. And is that 4441?
Yeah, I think that's the number they used.
Okay.
There's all these version numbers floating around. It gets a little difficult to tell what's going on. But that version essentially repeated what was previously in Section 336 in the Public Law 112-95, which was the last FAA reauthorization. And it looked pretty good. It kind of preserved everything that we had, and it actually added some verbiage in talking about exactly what a community-based organization was. And for all intents and purposes, it essentially doesn't come right out and say it, but it's very much describing the AMA.
Sure.
And making it clear that AMA is a community, or a CBO as they call it, because a lot of people have had difficulty understanding what a CBO was and what it meant to Congress. So the House version actually included that, which seemed like a very positive step. And that came out in February. Then we come to March, and in March, the Senate came out with their own version. And that's the one that I think really set everybody's pants on fire, because the Senate version was markedly different from the House version. And in it, what they do, and the House does it and the Senate did it both, they define what constitutes a hobby operation. And that's where we got these things, that, you're flying under the programming of a community-based organization. You'll notify airports within 5 miles. These things aren't actual, it's kind of it's a nuance, but it's not actual law per se. It's not like a speed limit. What it is it's a definition. It says if you want to be considered a hobby operation and be exempt from being underneath the thumb of the FAA, you have to operate within these guidelines.
And
so
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In that aspect, I'm getting some feedback from you. Let's see. All right. So I think that the Senate bill, and you have said this a number of times on different threads, is that yes, it is not law, and the Senate bill is almost is very scary because it puts what people are thinking are laws regarding 400-foot altitude, taking these tests that are required just to operate a hobby model aircraft. How did this happen? Who's on the Senate's side that they that they drafted this, and why is it so different from the House proposal?
Well, I think the Senate's got a different view of things. I mean, basically, all of this is born out of the concern on the part of the public and a lot of the lawmakers of the dangers, perceived or real, from, quote, drones. And unfortunately, what's happened is there's been a real blurring of the lines that I think most of these people understand that we who are flying, say giant scale airplanes or soaring or pattern planes, that we're not the issue. But the problem is they haven't been really effective at trying to figure out how to separate us. And that's why they keep coming up with this wording about community-based organizations and everything. The Senate version included as part of that definition of what a hobby operation is, this 400-foot altitude cap. And that's what really, was really the most onerous thing. And again, that wouldn't have been a thing that said you can never, ever fly over 400 feet. And it becomes kind of a weird little twist, because what it's really saying is when you fly over 400 feet, you are no longer, quote, a hobby operation. You're now something else. And if you're
that
something
has yet to be defined.
Yeah. Basically it says then you're subject to anything and everything the FAA wants to do to you. And the FAA actually came out with a notice of proposed rulemaking in January of 2015 that parsed out those two things. They had a Part 107, which covers commercial operations, and then they took Section 336 and put it in what's called Part 101.41, which basically says this is what the hobby guys are going to follow. And so we're kind of waiting for that to get finalized. And, you keep hearing rumblings that FAA says they're going to do that by June. Meanwhile, Congress has stepped in, and surprise, surprise, Congress is mucking things up because it looked like we had a smooth path coming. And now, because there's all these, quote, sightings of drones around airports, the Senate has come up with the idea that they're just going to limit everything to 400 feet. And, that's going to make everybody safe, because that's what they're really reacting to, is this fear that airliners are going to be falling out of the sky. And I've long said this, that everything Congress and the FAA is doing is based on this sort of dream sequence they have where they're the guys standing in front of a bank of microphones with flaming wreckage behind them, and everyone's yelling, "Why didn't you do something to stop this?" So they're primarily motivated out of a sense of fear too. And that's where the Senate bill came up with this 400 foot. Now, fortunately, the AMA recently, day before yesterday, they got that modified in the latest version of the bill, where it has some verbiage talking about if you're, under certain circumstances operating under a community-based organization and whatnot, you'll be, this won't be part of your definition of what a hobby operation is. So that's a good first step at separating us. Unfortunately, what still gets retained is this as yet undefined testing, because we don't know what that's going to be. And knowing the FAA, it's not going to be simple. They'll make it something complex and convoluted. And there's some other things in the Senate bill that are worrisome about potential restrictions on manufacturers and the things that they're going to have to do. And,
Yeah, it sounds like if it's not created and built to an FAA standard that is yet to be defined, this future ARF aircraft could be deemed illegal, and it's just the silliest thing I have ever heard.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so tell me
Well,
this, what
go
is the
ahead.
difference? Okay, so we've described the difference between the House and the Senate bills. How far along is the House bill? How far along is the Senate bill? And then who picks which one goes into effect?
Well, what happens now, and the AMA has kind of a good graphic on their website and the government relations blog that kind of shows this. What happens is the House and the Senate move along on parallel paths, and they have respective committees that come up with what's considered their initial version of the laws. And that's where we're at now. The House has come out of their committee that comes up with this and said, this is our version. The Senate is pretty much done with their version that comes out of, I believe, the Commerce Committee. And once both of those House and the Senate committees have finished and said, okay, this is what we want to do, then they'll each send it to their respective complete group. So it'll go to all 100 senators in the Senate version, and the House version will go to all 435 congressmen. They'll vote, and they'll say, and then that will approve the House and the Senate versions. From there, then it goes into a sausage factory called the Conference Committee. And that's where the Senate and the House get together, and they kind of go through line by line and try to reconcile each of their versions to come up with a unified version. And then it goes back to both the House and the Senate to be revoted on again.
Wow.
And then they both approve that reconciled version, then it goes to the president for signature. So that's why they just recently passed an extension that goes to, I think, July of 2016, because they realize they don't have the time to get this done. And it may come July and they'll still not have it done. So it's not it's not unusual for them to have to do 3 or 4 extensions. They had to do it back in 2012 several times. So we're in a situation where there's some things that are a little disconcerting that we're seeing right now, like about 400 tests and things like that. But we still have time. And AMA sent around an email the other day that basically trying to calm people down and say, look, we're on this. And but I think that they're getting, the AMA is having a hard time keeping up with everything that all these senators are doing and all the congressmen are doing. I think they're making headway. So the bottom line is we have reasons for concern, but we don't have to panic just yet. And there's still times for things to get reconciled. We're just going to have to wait and see how it works out. In the meanwhile, we can contact our senators, our representatives. We can also communicate to the AMA and tell them, give them feedback so they understand where we're coming from as members and what's concerning us and what we want to see.
I think that the AMA has been, to put it, I guess, lightly blindsided just a little bit by how fast this has moved in recent years. A lot of people have compared the AMA and the NRA, and they're just two completely different animals. I mean, the NRA has been doing this, with billions of dollars behind them, and they've been lobbying on Capitol Hill for so long. Now, that's not to say the AMA hasn't done that as well. They've kept our flying rights, free, if you will, for many years. But the whole drone-based argument has caught the AMA, in my personal opinion, a little bit off guard, and they've had to play catch up a little bit recently. Now, I think with their recent email that went out yesterday, yeah, they've done a really good job in lobbying on Capitol Hill. They're getting some stuff done, but it can sometimes get lost when we're, the boots on the ground, when we're out flying and we see these things about these 400-foot limitations and or even definitions, 400-foot definition to be defined as a hobbyist, it gets scary. And then you start saying, what the heck is the AMA actually doing for us?
Well, yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think that to a certain degree, AMA gets blindsided at times. This happened with the last Section 336. They were completely blindsided by the FAA coming out with their interpretation of the special rule for model aircraft, and that's because a lot of this goes on behind, I don't want to say necessarily closed doors, but it goes on outside of the view of the AMA or any other lobbying group.
Mm-hmm.
And then things just kind of appear. And so it does appear they've been blindsided. And I think on the other hand too is I think a lot of times AMA doesn't say every little thing here for just the reason that they don't want to panic people, because you get this, little dribs and drabs of misinformation out there, and then suddenly nobody knows what's really going on, and everybody's running around with their hair on fire, and and it gets very difficult to once misinformation starts permeating the internet, then it's a tough thing. It's like one of my favorite things to say is the internet's a great thing. It spreads fear and ignorance at the speed of light. And
it sure does, doesn't it? But well, that's the problem, is that if they were to update every single time that they saw something, there would be a lot of retractions. There'd be a lot of, what we said yesterday isn't exactly true.
Well, and what happens too is you get people that are coming into the conversation at different points. So, you have somebody that comes in late to the game and they're not aware of all the history, and it's, and so, and you're constantly having to rehash things, and, and it gets to be a very difficult situation. I mean, I have been critical of the AMA. I think that they, one of the fundamental errors they'd made early on was they should have done a much more aggressive program of trying to demonstrate to everyone, the public, the lawmakers, law enforcement, the differences between, quote, us and them being, the people that I think are truly raising the concerns, the multi-rotors, aerial photography type of things that, there's a lot of very responsible people in that community, but there's a lot of very irresponsible people because it's so easy. I mean, DJI just came out with the Phantom 4, and it can fly 3 miles away. Mm-hmm. And so some guy who knows nothing can, who basically all he has to do is figure out how to get it started and charge the battery, can go up and just go fly 3 miles away from himself.
A complete polar opposite from giant scale aviation. Completely polar opposite.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is, just trying to educate all of these people that, there's a fundamental difference between something that's gyroscopically stabilized and able to navigate via GPS and a model airplane. You've probably seen me say a lot that, multi-rotors and aerial photography is a great hobby. Mm-hmm. It's not model aviation. It's not the hobby that we know. And it's kind of hard for everyone to get their heads, people that aren't deeply involved to understand the differences between us. So we ended up getting lumped together.
That's the truth. And you're right. There are some irresponsible pilots that get a brand new drone, if you will, for Christmas, and they go out and they fly foolishly, and then they become the poster boy for model aviation. And that's sad. It should not be like that.
I agree.
The guys that are out there banging sticks at low and slow, hucking their 3D planes around are no threat to anything. Even the glider guys, usually I fly gliders as well. And so you end up, I mean, like you said, a winch launch will put you over 400 feet. So what you do in that situation is you pick your flying field correctly. You don't go to a place you could be near air traffic and such like that. And so,
And even if you are, I mean, I'll give you an example. We have a flying site here that's not far from John Wayne Airport, which is a Class D airspace airport. And it's a very busy airport. And there's a flying site that's been there for a long time, flying gliders. But the airport is aware of us. And when we're flying there, we have instituted administrative controls that keep us safe. And we've been flying there for decades with no incidents at all. You know, we do things like we have a spotter. Like we had a contest on Sunday, and there's a guy who was a designated spotter, and he had one of those air horns. And if we spotted any full-scale traffic that we thought was a conflict, the horn goes off, everybody comes down, and we clear the airspace.
There you go. Common sense trumps knee-jerk reaction any day.
Exactly. And, you know, again, I don't think a lot of these people that are causing the problem are necessarily malicious. I think that they're ignorant. You know, they don't understand airspace. And that's part of where this testing requirement, I think, is coming from, because the FAA keeps saying, well, we understand the people that are causing problems. A lot of it's because they just don't know any better. So the Senate has said, well, let's make them know better. Let's make them take a test. You know?
Well, hopefully that would be something outside of a CBO. Right.
Well, and it appears, and I think that that's what the AMA is working towards, but as was demonstrated so graphically with the registration requirement, sometimes the AMA can't get things done the way they want to get them done.
Yeah,
and it's difficult for us to grasp, but the bottom line is we're a very tiny slice of the general population. And, you know, you'll see things bandied about that, you know, there's something like 80 million people a year who fly commercially. And so people in Congress are saying, well, you know, if it comes down to a few thousand guys not being able to fly the tour airplanes to give us, if nothing else, the perception of keeping those 80 million plus people safe, then they're going to do it.
Absolutely. You pander to the masses.
Yeah, and you know, and it all comes back to that thing I was saying earlier. You know, they all have this vision in their head of being the guy standing in front of the flaming wreckage, you know, with people screaming, "Why didn't you stop this?" And you know, and so you know, with respect to the FAA, another problem that they have with us and with UAVs in general is everything the FAA has done for all of their history is focused on manned aviation. And now suddenly we have these unmanned aircraft, and they really don't know what to do with them. It's, you know, it's such a new thing to them that they have this whole paradigm built around manned aircraft that they just don't know what to do with it. So they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole kind of thing, because they have this understanding of how to regulate manned aircraft, and they're trying to make unmanned aircraft fit it. And, you know, I mean, and it's a real mess. And,
yep.
You know, and to their defense, they do say, and it is true, we have the busiest airspace in the world. So, you know, what other countries have done can be instructive, but they have very different sets of circumstances too. And, you know, so I'm not trying to defend anything, but, you know, there's all these realities that are out there that, you know, it's a difficult situation. You know, the worst thing I ever hear anybody say about something is, well, it's simple. Well, no, it's not. It's very, very difficult, and it's very complicated.
Yep. Bill, we have a live question from one of our viewers. Is there an organization other than the AMA that we can get behind or work with to combat the FAA regulations?
You know, right now,
question.
Yeah, well, you know, and that's been a question that people have said, are there other community-based organizations? And, you know, there really aren't right now, as far as it goes for us, as far as model aircraft. There are a couple of other organizations that are oriented towards aerial photography and whatnot, but they just haven't been as successful. And there is one organization that's very large, but it's oriented more towards the larger UAVs, you know, the Boeings and the Lockheed, you know, and that kind of thing. So, you know, for all practical purposes, AMA is our ball game, and
it is.
You know, we may not like everything they're doing, but they need our support because they're the only guys going to bat for us.
So here's a hypothetical question. As a hobbyist, as a giant scale hobbyist yourself, where do you see giant scale aviation next year in 5 years for hobby, obviously?
Well, the hope is that will be pretty much what we're seeing now. You know, there might be some more check boxes we have to check. I mean, you know, obviously the registration thing and you know some things like that. But you know, the ultimate hope is that by and large things aren't going to be too terribly different.
Yeah.
And I'm semi-optimistic that we're going to be in that standpoint. Of course, the worst case for us would be that, you know, there were very stringent restrictions placed upon us, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I think there may be places where it's going to be more sensitive. There are going to be situations like happened in Washington, D.C., where because of the sensitivity of the airspace, they finally just said, okay, 400 feet is going to be the rule here. And that is an actual operating rule for them in the special flight rules area around DC. I think most of us aren't going to really feel that pinch, you know, because we're already places like I fly at a place that's not far from Chino Airport, and they've had a 400-foot altitude limit there forever. The Sepulveda Basin has a low altitude cap. So there'll be specific instances, but I think by and large we're going to be okay. But we've got a little bit of a bumpy road before we get there. I think, you know, I put it the other day that, you know, we can see the edge of the woods right now, but we're not out of the woods yet. So that's why we have to keep an eye on what's going on. We have to stay informed. And it's difficult because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And frankly, like I said, this is very complicated because, you know, people talk about the 400-foot rule and it's not actually a rule. It's part of a definition. And, you know, so functionally it's the same thing, but it's legally not. And, you know, and so, you know, because people say, well, are the police going to arrest me if I fly at 401 feet? No, they're not.
Right.
You know, so it's really it's such a new information or such a new situation for us. I think it can be very confusing, but I think long term we're going to be okay, but we're going to have to be vigilant and we're going to have to be prepared to stand up for ourselves and make our voices heard because we are kind of a small group, which means we're going to have to scream pretty loud.
We're a very small group. And
yeah.
I'm glad that you were, one thing that you were sort of saying, and I don't want to say ad nauseum, but there were plenty of people that were scared about the 400-foot rule, and you kept reassuring them over and over, hey guys, this isn't a law. This is a condition that must be met to be considered a hobbyist. And again, this is just on paper. So at the point right now, it hasn't gone through the Senate committee.
And the other thing is that during the registration process, the FAA put in this part of their guideline. So there's all these different 400 feet things, you know, floating around, and they all get kind of mixed mastered together. You know, the FAA did publish as a guideline that, you know, they want people in general to stay below 400 feet. And the FAA has been consistent in that. You know, they would prefer if most people stayed under 400 feet. Now, they understand that situations like we have where we're flying at established fields, you know, we have a set of operating rules that help make us safe, that there are exceptions. But, you know, they're really trying to walk this line of trying to control, you know, the newly minted drone pilots without, you know, hitting us up against the wall too hard.
Yep.
And, you know, and it's been difficult, but, you know, it's like I was saying with the registration, that was not a rule. That was a guideline. It's just like the AC 9157A. It mentions 400 feet as a best practice. You know, advisory circulars are not regulations. They're not rules. And as I keep saying, unless you see it in a FAR, or Federal Aviation Regulation, it's not a rule. And that's why even this thing in the Senate, it's not a rule in the legal sense, it's just part of a definition.
Right. Well, I think you have cleared up a lot of questions that I had specifically about the two different versions of the Reauthorization of Act and how they're sort of going down this path together. You painted a pretty clear picture of how they're both traveling to an end where the president is going to sign one of them as they come together at the end and hash it all out. Now, the Senate version is the dangerous version with the 400-foot cap and testing, and the House version seems to be what we've seen before with the old 336.
Pretty much,
yeah.
And and like I said, I think the next major step is to see what comes out of the what ultimately gets voted on by both of them, because they're still going to be making tweaks and changes before it goes to the vote in each one of the houses, and then when it goes into, like, I use the term sausage factory because that's what it is. And what comes out the other end of the sausage factory may not look anything like what's going in. So I keep saying we've got reason to be concerned, but I don't think we should be panicked yet either. I mean, I see people saying they're going to start selling their airplanes and stuff, and I don't think we need to be right there yet.
No, I said it once before. I flew yesterday, I'll fly today, and I'll fly next year. And it's just business as usual for me. I think one of our reviewers, Nikolai, he kind of chimed in here, and he didn't have a question, but he said, drone ignorance in the general public is like speeding. Everyone's aware of the speed limit. Everyone speeds, but nobody admits that they might hurt somebody by speeding. I'm not the problem. So I don't know. As far as that goes, I will continue to operate in a safe manner that I do, and I always seem to, when you do an upline, you punch through 400 feet in a heartbeat, and then you're back down, and you're no worse for wear. So I think I'll continue to fly just like I flew yesterday, the day before, and all that sort of stuff, and be happy about the hobby and not. If you really bog down in the semantics, you'll have a heart attack. You really will think the sky's falling, and they're trying to destroy the hobby completely.
I do think that as each of us are out flying, we do need to have a little bit of a sense of heightened sensitivity to understand that, you don't want to be the guy that causes the problem. So, when you're going to go fly somewhere, you want to assess the situation maybe more than you did in the past. I'm not saying obsess about it, but just say, well, okay, I'm not at my normal field. I'm flying somewhere else. Is this a good idea? Or is this something somebody who doesn't know any better is going to be able to twist around and make us all look bad?
Right.
And that's what we have to understand is, we're a community now, and we're a community that's being judged by the actions of individuals. And so we have to make sure that each of us as individuals is doing what we can to protect that greater community. There's too many people that have this idea, screw it, I'm going to do what I want to do. And we all have to understand that everything we do now, we're under a microscope, and so everything we do can potentially reflect badly on the rest of us.
Yep. So let's get one more question in. I know I've taken you a little bit longer than I said I would, but you're full of information here, and I do appreciate you being on, Bill. FG Pappy asks, what about the manufacturing requirements? So we did briefly touch on the manufacturing issues that is it the Senate bill is
yeah, the Senate bill has that. The problem with that section so far is it doesn't specifically exempt model aircraft. I don't think they really want to include model aircraft, but right now they haven't specifically exempted model aircraft from these requirements that seem to be somewhat like what they hold full-scale aircraft to now. That manufacturers are going to have to demonstrate that they have practices, policies, and procedures that end up making something that is safe, that is well thought out, well engineered, and and kind of like a manned aircraft. I think that that's clearly directed more towards the quote drone market, because they talk about autonomous control and being able to have return to home things built in and that kind of stuff. So I think what the AMA is doing now is trying to
differentiate the
trying to
modelers
get
from.
the Senate to say, look, you need to differentiate model aircraft, what we're doing from that. But for right now, that's a scary, to me, that's the scariest part, because that could have a very chilling effect on our ability to have things to fly. I think that's what the AMA is working on now, is trying to get that softened, or try to get it so that it clearly excludes us.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you said, there's a long way to go. I mean, it's actually, in the whole scheme of things, it's a very short time frame, but we do have a little bit of a road ahead of us as the rules get hashed out. And yeah, I'm hoping that the AMA can step in and exempt the hobby aspect of it from the commercial aspect of it. So DJI will be there. I know they're foaming at the mouth to sort of stay out of that aspect of it, because if DJI and other companies like that had to go through an FAA sort of process to approve every airframe they have, because hobbyists use it and commercial operators use it.
Right.
They're in a world of hurt, man. They're in a world of hurt. So
yeah, I mean, so we can at least look at it that we know that some of the big guns are fighting it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because and DJI is the 800-pound gorilla, but there's a lot of other companies that have these various devices, and I don't think anybody's happy about it. And so we can look at it that this is a first pass right now, and we, as I keep saying, we need to remain aware and vigilant, and make our voices heard, but we don't need to be panicked yet.
I think that's something good to take away from this. Well, look, thanks for being on, Bill. It was actually a pleasure meeting you for the first time. I've followed you for years. You are Judge on Flying Giants, judge and jury. It seems like you got a lot of information under your noggin there on this whole FAA. I will go out and call it a debacle, because it's a big cluster.
I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
It's
that's right.
They're trying to do something. They just don't know what they want to do.
Right. Well, I want to thank the viewers that chimed in with questions, and I hope we can do this again. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'll let you get back to whatever it is you're doing. You're 4 hours behind me, so it's bright and early in the morning.
3 hours. 3 hours.
3 hours. Okay. Okay. I don't even know
You're
anymore.
in Ohio?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Cleveland.
It's only 3 hours.
All right. All right. Well, again, good seeing you, and thanks everybody for listening. This is Flying Giants live podcast. We will have this live on Flying Giants as an article here soon. So, Bill, again, nice meeting you, and thanks for being on. And thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Yes, he is Judge. Somebody just asked, is he Judge? There you go. That is Judge. You can put the face to the name. So, thanks, Bill.
Okay, you're welcome.